Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome to the Oriental Café, a podcast where we will sit at the same table to explore the fascinating worlds of Egyptian dance, personal empowerment, and halas, life. I'm your host, Joana Saahirah, world-renowned Oriental dancer, teacher, choreographer, and author, the creator of the pioneering Joana Saahirah's World and Joana Saahirah's Online Dance School. I will meet you at the Oriental Café every 2 weeks, alone or with a guest, sharing intimate yet universal conversations. In agreement or disagreement, we will create bridges and inspire each other, because the world is only one, and so is our human soul. Ready to fall in love? Yalla bina! Officially opening another episode of the Oriental Café podcast with several times guest, Leslie Zehr. We have met in Cairo many years ago. I have hosted you in at least 2 webinars. You have hosted me in one kind of a webinar conversation.
Summit,
conference.
yes.
Yes, and it was always so inspiring to speak with you. You have this practical, down-to-earth look about you, but you have so much more depth than you look. I'm being very honest.
Okay, I'll take that as a compliment.
It's talking for me, because I think, I can feel your I don't know, Taurus, earthy rootedness thing, and then suddenly you open your mouth and I go, what's going on? Who is this? Is he an alien?
Layers.
In the best possible way. Really, like, you have the best of both worlds as far as I'm concerned. So it's a pleasure to host you in an episode of my new podcast. You're going to be part of this first season. And when I thought about the group of guests that I wanted to bring, your name was on the list since I first thought about creating a podcast. So welcome, Leslie. And instead of introducing you, what I like to do is I let my guest introduce himself or herself, because I believe that since we've talked, you have changed. And since we've talked, your definition of what you do has probably evolved as well. So why don't you please welcome yourself into the podcast episode and let us know, how do you see yourself? How do you present yourself in your own words? What do you do?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and congratulations on your new podcast. I think this is exciting. We need more people talking about dance. It's an important thing. So, how would I describe myself? Well, I mainly describe myself as a mentor, I think, in sacred dance, but all of the sacred arts. For me, everything kind of came together. I moved to Egypt in the mid-'80s, and I've been here ever since. And really around 2000, I had quite an experience in one of the temples in Upper Egypt, in Hector's temple. And she pretty much became my guiding light. And she's the goddess of love, empowerment, but also music and scrying and dance and all of these things. So she very much inspired me. And the dance form that I do, which I call the alchemy of dance, was pretty much just downloaded after visiting her temple. I began to dance, and the movements moved through me, and I had a notebook in my hand just to sort of capture everything that was coming in, because for me, dance is the way that I open to the divine. And that's why I say it's sacred dance, because it's very much an experience, a spiritual experience, and one between me and the divine. So that's how dance. I was trained in dance as a child. From the time I would think I was 6 years old, I started dancing and I was a competitive ice skater at one point, and I did musical comedy, theater. So I did have a dance background, but this was a whole different experience. And I have studied a lot of modalities of healing, and many esoteric things. But really, for me, what came in was something new. And as I said, it was under the guidance of the goddess Hector. So it is something that I created. Most of the modalities I created in Egypt and are very much related to Egypt. So now I think that I'm in my 60s. It's time to mentor others, the next generation. And I very much believe in sort of this council of elders. So I'm very excited to be one of the grandmothers then to help the next generation coming along.
We're going to go deeper into several concepts that you have touched. That's part of the questions that I had in mind for you. But let's go back a little bit more. So I'm very curious about what has attracted you to Egypt in the first place in the 80s. And by the way, that was a fun era to be in Egypt for so many reasons, economic reasons, political, yes, cultural. It was still an abundance and fun time. So I've heard, so I was a baby, so I could not have experienced it, but I read and I heard and I worked with musicians in Egypt who were working at that time, and everybody talks about the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, like golden times, yes, for mostly everybody. But aside from knowing what attracted you to Egypt, I'm even more curious to know why you remained in Egypt, because it is a country that goes through a lot of transformation, sometimes in a very fast pace. It's not an easy country to live in. It's full of contradictions, it's complex, it's beautiful, and it's ugly, and it exposes you to the divine in a way that I don't think you experience anywhere else in the world, but it also exposes you to very hard realities. I'm speaking from my own perspective, yes, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, not everyone who lives in Egypt has the same experience, for sure, but what it was like to fall in love with it and be drawn to it, and what it's like to remain in Egypt so many years after that initial passion. And why do you stay? Why do you remain in Egypt?
Well, initially, I think I was probably 7 or 8 years old when I first encountered Egypt in a history class, and all ancient cultures, Near East, all of that. And that was it. Like, something happened in me. And at that point, I wanted to be an Egyptologist. So that's when my passion for Egypt came up. But as time went on, I forgot about it somehow. I actually went into the sciences and I studied biochemistry. I went in a completely different direction. And then I met an Egyptian man and I came to Egypt to see him. We got married. And for me, men are the gatekeepers. First, it was my father taking me different places, and now it was my husband who opened this door. And I remember I was born in Peru, and I lived there till I was 6 years old. But when I first came to Egypt, I felt like I had come home. It reminded me of that. And again, it may be like an economic thing, that the buildings are very similar, and the culture is, although very different, somewhat similar, and that it's probably more extended families and this kind of thing. But I really had a sense of coming home, and I did get married. That was the way that I came. But it allowed me also to integrate into the culture in a way that I wouldn't have if I had just come as a tourist. Because my mother-in-law, my husband's sisters and brothers, and they're all Egyptian. So I lived here as an Egyptian rather than as an expat. And that was really comfortable for me. I like this kind of culture. I like extended families. As I said, I went to the US when I was 6, and I was never comfortable there. I'm not comfortable in Western culture. It never felt right. I don't agree with this capitalist idea and things like that. So when I came to Egypt, it really was a feeling of coming home. And I was accepted. I had a family here. So that kind of made it easy, and that I did have that support. And that's mainly what I was involved in the beginning. It wasn't, I have 2 children. And so I was involved in that, involved in family. When my son, who's the youngest, turned 2, I started a La Leche League group in Egypt, which is a breastfeeding support group. And that was my first experience with running women's groups. And then it just sort of expanded. So that was a very practical thing of supporting and mentoring women, new mothers. And then after that, I opened a center, and then I was supporting women, but in more sort of the sacred arts and things like that. Mm-hmm. Then this is a very long answer to your question, but
it is. Can I just stop you there before you finish? Because new questions have popped into my mind as I was listening to you. So one thing I would like to ask you is, what do you mean in more vivid terms by feeling better in an Egyptian environment, not so much identifying with a Western environment? How does it feel like, and how does it look like to live like an Egyptian? Because this is a question I get from people all the time. As you know, I lived in Egypt for a long time. I was about 10 years working, performing. Of course, my environment was different from yours. I was still amongst Egyptians and working with Egyptians for Egyptians, but I wasn't married with an Egyptian. So I did not have the family life of an Egyptian. I did not participate in a lot of rituals, habits, good and bad things that come when you join an Egyptian family. So I share a part of your experience, and a part of your experience is total foreign to me. But people ask me about it. What is it like to live like an Egyptian? And what is it that attracts you in that culture that does not attract you in Western culture? This is my first question. And then before I forget, let's see if we don't forget, I would love to know how it was that first breastfeeding support group, I imagine with Egyptian women?
Both. They were expat and Egyptian women.
Okay,
yes.
So let's go to, how does it look and feel like to live like an Egyptian woman, basically? Because I know that's what happens when you marry an Egyptian. You marry into that family. You are surrounded by the sisters, the cousins, the mother-in-law. What is it that makes it so wonderful in opposition to what it's like to live in the West? Can you summarize it?
I think it's really a sense of community. It's very much family-based, and life centers around the family. So I think this is the biggest distinction between, say, Egypt and Western culture, where Western culture tends to be more about your career and monetary things. And there's a lot of separation. Very often you move very far away from your family. I didn't know my family. I rarely saw them because they were at great distances. So I like that feeling of community, of being together, of being supported. And now, as we kind of move into the technological age, I think people are more and more separated. You have everybody texting rather than talking to people. And I remember when I first came to Egypt, people would just come to the front door. Like I would open the front door and one of my husband's friends would be standing there, and I was so surprised. And, I asked him about this, and he like, why don't they call first? Or he said, well, the phones don't often work in Egypt, so everybody just got used to dropping by. So instead of calling you, because that just isn't something that people got used to, they would just show up. And what was interesting was in 2011, when we had the revolution here, and they turned off all of the internet and the cell phones. This is what people started doing again, was they couldn't get in touch with you, but they wanted to make sure you were okay. So they would just show up at your front door. And it was kind of amusing to me. And it reminded me of that time when people did just, and as soon as you get used to it, I think then you're not bothered by it. And it's kind of nice. It's very, as you know, Egyptians are very friendly and very interactive. So that's a huge part of the society, is interacting with family members, but also friends, but just interacting. So, which is not something that I'm great at. So it's been a learning experience. I've learned a lot while I'm here. But I would say that is the main difference, if I have to just sort of put it in boxes, is that one is family or community centered and the other one is more career centered. So and that's not something I aspire to. I have my career, which I see more as a calling, and I am all about family and community. And I think that is also what most expats that come here, it's the people they meet. It's the connections that they make with other people that make them want to stay, because there is that sense of community. I'm sure for yourself as well, you probably still have a lot of friends here that are still close, because I just see that sort of as the essence of the society, really. Yeah.
It is. Egypt is a place where I believe, at least in my experience, people are, how can I put this? They are inclined, they are open for human connection in a way that I don't find anywhere else in the world. I have this image, and I often comment this with friends here and with my husband. I tell them, one of the things I miss the most about my daily life in Egypt is walking into a place, any place, coffee shop, market, school, whatever. And people are drawn to you genuinely, eager to connect, independently of commercial dealings that may be on the table. You know, maybe you go to a bookshop, as I used to go a lot to Diwan. You must know it for sure. I used to go a lot to Diwan and to the Hussein for stuff for my work. And there was, before the commercial enterprise, a genuine curiosity for the other and a genuine desire to connect, to interact. A smile, a word, a joke, anything that creates human connection. And in this world, as you were saying, where we are more and more disconnected, although we seem to be so connected through the internet, but we are humanly disconnected. Okay, that is kind of almost vintage. You know, it's retro. Egypt is retro, is vintage, but it is so wonderful. And I totally relate with what you're saying. I have one more thing to know about that environment of coming from a married woman to an Egyptian man. What was one thing, just one thing at the top of your head that you have learned from the women, Egyptian women in your family, in that closed circle? One thing, out of curiosity.
Well, I think it set me on the path to the divine feminine, to be honest. I don't think I had ever really met a matriarch before I met my mother-in-law. And people say Egypt is very patriarchal, but it's matriarchal at the same time. I think those two things really run side by side, because she was the head of the family. And my father-in-law had passed away a long time ago, but she was the head of the family. It was not in necessarily a financial sense, although she was independently, she could, finance her own life. But in the sense of whatever she said, everybody listened to. And I had never experienced a culture like that before. And so I think there's a lot of criticism, even amongst Egyptian women. They don't see themselves as empowered as they really are. And I think, I always wanted to do a workshop that would be taught by Egyptian women to teach women how to be empowered, because they really are. So I think I learned that, and I'm still learning that, because I'm not good at that. I'm not good at asserting myself, but Egyptian women are. And my daughter is. She's, I always say when I grow up, I want to be just like her, because I do. I aspire to be able to do that, to have that power that is empowerment that comes from your center. And so I think that I would have to say is the greatest thing that I learned from these other women, really.
And that's surprising. That's something that people don't know about, also because
No.
The way I see it, in Egypt, you have an external patriarchy, and that's also applying to the legal code. The laws in Egypt are clearly patriarchal and oriented towards Muslim religion and oriented towards male domination. That is no doubt. I know, because I suffered from those laws. So I leave that prison. But internally, they're the ones in charge. So internally, in their domestic realm, in their private lives, as you were saying, they have this. In Egyptian dance, especially in Raqs al-Balad, we teach a lot the archetypes, right? The archetypes in Egypt. So there is the archetype of the Ma'alema. There is the archetype of the Bint al-Balad, Bint al-Gada. There are certain archetypes that are embodied by Egyptian women that most foreigners don't even dream about.
Sure.
So they just see them as a unidimensional victimized group.
Yeah.
They don't see other colors, other layers of reality that are actually there. So I'm not surprised that you felt your mother-in-law was the matriarch.
Yes.
Not surprised. And I'm not surprised that you felt, wow, they have this fierceness, this assertiveness. Banat al-Balad, Banat al-Balad, Sitat al-Balad. They have this, sometimes it's hard to find a word, this strength, this inner strength, and this inner self-assurance.
And that's why I call it empowerment, because it is a power. But again, I think we have to think about, when we talk about patriarchy and matriarchy, the masculine is external. So you are meant to see the masculine. It's the boundary, and the feminine is the space inside. So you are going to see a culture that appears to be masculine, but you're going to feel a culture that's very feminine. And so I think you can't judge what that is, or the balance of things, just by the way they appear, because they are going to appear very masculine. And because that's the nature of the masculine, is to be external. So I think, don't take that at face value. And because you lived here, you got deeper into it. And I think anybody that's here for a while gets a sense of that. But you don't. When you first come, you see, something that is very masculine.
Yeah, on the surface. But then if you know it in depth, you see other layers, other dimensions that makes it so much more complex and interesting and hard to put a label on. It's hard to categorize. It's very hard. That comes from superficial contact. Now, another question I have for you is your call or your attraction in relation to ancient Egypt. I'm going to tell you why. First of all, because it's a central part of your work. So we had to speak about this, but also because I personally have always felt a very deep attraction for ancient Egypt. My first trips to Egypt as a student, I had no idea I was going to move or do dance professionally. Nothing, zero. I just went because I was studying Egyptian dance, and I went with my teacher, and it was staple. We have to know Karnak, we have to know Komombo, we have to go to Edfu, to Philae, to this, to that. And I personally felt a very scary for me, very scary call and a very scary attraction towards a world that is underneath contemporary Egypt. So nowadays, if you go to Egypt, you don't have a pharaonic Egypt. You have a very different country than the country of the ancient pharaohs. But what is it? What is it that attracts so many of us? Because we're not alone. You and me, we're not alone in this fascination for ancient Egypt. What is it that calls us back to that time and space? And what does ancient Egypt has to teach us today?
Well, there's a very long answer to that, so I'll try to make it very brief.
Okay.
I think all of us are attracted to ancient cultures because we all came from them. We're all connected. It's our history. It's our collective history. But also, if you look at what now might be esoteric or spiritual wisdom, but is becoming much more mainstream, we go through cycles and ages. And there is the golden age, which is a 25,000-year cycle. We have just come out of the lowest point of that. But ancient Egypt and these ancient cultures that we know, and it goes much further back than that, but let's just talk about those. They were actually much higher than us in the sense of spiritual evolution and consciousness. So as we moved from there down to what was called the Kali Yuga, which was really in the dark ages, we lost it. And you can see that. You can see as you go from Egyptian history, even to Greek, and then to the more European and things like that, things were lost. In ancient Egypt, everything was sacred. And magic and science were the same thing, and the universe flowed together, and their consciousness was very high. If you really read, and not so much even what archaeologists are putting out, but there's a lot of other people, sort of, self-trained archaeologists, or even look at anthropologists. They have a much broader view. So we lost that. We actually became less evolved, and now we're moving back up. As we've gone to the lowest point, we are moving back up, and I think you see that with the interest in consciousness raising and spirituality and all of that. So I think Egypt, because everything is preserved, it's all in stone. You can go, and they knew that. So they made these 3-dimensional classrooms. So when you go into the ancient temples, if you just stand there, just go in there and stand there. When I take people on tours, this is what we do. We just go in and we absorb, because all those hieroglyphs have a frequency and they are acting on you if you are ready to receive what that is. But it's been preserved. And that's the beautiful thing, is that we didn't lose it. It's still there. Maybe we don't understand it on a conscious level, but you understand it on the energetic level. So I think that, and I do think when people just see pictures of ancient Egypt, it unlocks something in their psyche, because it's something that's been asleep for a very long time and is being reawakened.
What has ancient Egypt taught us, or what does it have to teach us today? Because when I speak about students of Egyptian dance, for instance, their interest in Egypt is recent, is contemporary. They don't even consider ancient Egypt. They think it's something of a history class. They don't think there is any connection to the dance they do nowadays. And I tell them, in order to understand the contemporary Egypt, you really have to go back, because that's where it all starts. And that's where a lot of the magic of Egyptian dance, for me, I'm a unicorn, okay? I'm weird. So this is, for me, it's not the mainstream opinion, starts. For me, it all goes back to ancient Egypt, but people don't get it. It's hard to make that bridge between our times, this Egypt that they may know if they travel to Egypt, and ancient Egypt is too far away for them. It's a reference that is too distant. what is, in your experience, in your opinion, the most important things that ancient Egypt has to teach us nowadays? Things that are important for us today. What would that be?
Soul. And I think Egypt itself, even modern Egypt, has soul as a country. And a lot of places just don't. But in ancient Egypt, dance was sacred. I mean, dance was our first religion. We did it in caves, in ancient times. And I think that's why it's important, because dance is something that primordial and that essential. And I know that you know what I'm talking about. And I'm sure that's what you gained from living here. You gained a transmission, and you can take that out in the world and transmit to other people. But a lot of other people are studying Oriental dance somewhere and have no connection to this soul or this essence. Something is really missing. And that's why it's important, because, I mean, obviously I do sacred dance. So the sacredness of dance is extremely important to me. But I think even if you're not doing sacred dance, you're tapping into that primordial part of yourself that goes through history. It's our birthright. To move is and I say this in my book, dance is your birthright. As children, we dance, we move. It's moving through us. And this goes more deeply into what I teach about the serpent goddess and the alchemy of dance and how it's transformational. But there is that essence of movement inside of us. And that's why I think it's important to go back to ancient cultures where this was a sacred thing, to be able to tap into that. Yes, as a child, you can tap into that because you don't consciously know what you're doing. You're just moving. But as an adult, I think we've denied that part of ourselves. So we have to consciously go back. And I think Egypt, because of what's preserved here in these temples, that energy that's being held, it's a great way to do that. We can access that energy. So somebody who studies Oriental dance, go to the temples and just stand there and say, what, imbue me with, especially Hathor's temple, because she's the goddess of dance. Just go there and absorb what that is, because there is something very essential and very energetic that will enliven your dance. It'll probably enliven your life, but it will enliven the movement inside of you, or what's moving inside of you, or what can move inside of you. So it's an essence, I think, that we can tap into.
I think I told you before, I don't remember, in one of our previous talks, that in one of those first visits to Egypt, perhaps the first, I don't remember exactly, in several spots, pharaonic spots, I had the shenanigans, meaning I lost sight, I lost my hearing, my legs were trembling like hell. I was freaked out, at least the first time. Then the second, the third, I was, okay, this is gonna pass. I'm not gonna die soon.
I know that now.
I was drawn to the walls of the temples, literally drawn. I mean, and it was very weird. The first time that happened, I'm not sure, but I think it was in Philae Temple, as we were approaching by the boat, because now it's isolated in an island. So we were approaching, it was me, my teacher at the time, Shokri Mohammed, and the group of dancers who were coming. And I started to lose my hearing. So that's weird. I'm in the boat and I cannot hear, and everybody's operating normally, but I cannot hear. And then blank, I cannot see a thing. It's all blank, and I'm freaking out and nobody's noticing. And then my legs shaking, but I knew the way to the temple, and I finished with my hands on the walls of the temple. And then I stood there for a while waiting for this to go away, very nervous, hysterical, like what is happening? And then suddenly my sight came back, the hearing came back, I cooled down, and I saw where I was. That happened to me in those first contacts, with ancient Egypt, with the temples. And I remember that something awakened in me that never went away. And when I say this, people think perhaps that I'm doing marketing, that I am creating a slogan. I'm not. I'm terrible at marketing. I would never be as smart as creating such a slogan. I'm genuinely telling you that once that portal, that energetic portal is opened, you are a different person. Suddenly,
Yes.
you cannot go back to being shallow. You cannot go back to being empty. There is a light, there is a soul, there is something that I cannot put into words that is suddenly reawakened in you. And that, of course, will translate into the dance, but it will translate into the person that you are. This is why I tell people there was a person before I started this journey, and there was a person after, really unrecognizable. I don't recognize myself. And I remember how I was on so many levels, a completely different person. Okay, so
this is an activation. And this is what happens. And it's the pituitary gland. It's like a Kundalini rising, the pituitary gland. And that's why you lose your hearing and your sight, because there's this opening. And that specifically is, you see, like King Tut with the serpent coming out of his forehead. That's an activation. That's the serpent goddess. She's moving up through you, and she opens the third eye. And once your third eye is open, you never see the world the same way again. And this can happen. That's what I'm saying about the energy of the temples and how it's being held there. You just go into that temple and you're very likely to have an experience like you had, just because of the energy. And it's opening the third eye. It's activating the pineal gland. And the interesting thing about the pineal gland for you as a dancer is that it's very much activated by movement. So for me, when I'm doing sacred dance, the movement, the music, the waves of the music, the waves of the movement are all activating the pineal gland. So, and obviously in ancient times or with shamans, this is one of the reasons they sing and they dance, because all of this vibration is what activates the third eye, activates the pineal gland. And I believe I would call Hector the goddess of vibration, because everything she does, music, dance, all of these things are related to waves, to vibrations. And that's the serpent goddess. As she moves through your body, she activates different parts of your body. So yes, you never are the same after after that.
I couldn't understand it at the time. I'm going to be very honest. I was just, the first time I freaked out. I said, what the hell happened here? I was very scared, because also I did not know if my sight and my hearing were going to come back. Mm-hmm. So I lost track of time. I don't know how long I was like a fool, with my both hands. Other people might have thought she has gone insane. Why is she with her hands stuck to the walls, And I was afraid my sight and my hearing weren't going to come back. Once I realized that they went away and they came back, I said, okay, this is weird, but I can handle it. I can handle it. But I never understood exactly what it was. Many years after, of course, with experience and connecting the dots, then I deduced, okay, I think this was some kind of opening. When you are initiated in Reiki, for instance, and your master opens or cleans the door of your seventh chakra, that was very much the sensation I got, of an opening to a dimension that I had no access to previously, but I could not fully understand it. I still cannot fully understand it. I just experience it. I live it. And I live it so much in my dance. So much. And a lot of the most interesting information that flows through me, interesting for me, that is, it's personal, comes when I am dancing.
Yes.
It flows through me when I am dancing, because
that opens the door. Movement opens the door to the third eye. So,
Absolutely.
And the same thing for me. I'm sure that's what happened when I went to her temple. That I had that opening, and the dance was what came in. And every time I danced, I activated. It's a portal, and you know how to open that portal. Once you've done it once, you know how. And then once you know how, then you can access many things. And for me, as I said, the whole dance form came in that way. But had I not known how to open that portal, I don't think I could have gotten there. I would not have gotten there. I couldn't have logically or through research gotten the information that I got in that way through direct connection.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, and that's not how it comes. That's not how it happens. Yeah, yeah, I totally understand. In your path, you have done so many things. You've written books. You are a leader of workshops, events, groups. You are, as you told me, now feeling like embodying the matriarch and guiding other women from other generations into their sacred dance, into their personal empowerment, back to their soul, which is sorely needed these days. I totally agree with you. It's like I've never seen so many humans disconnected from their souls. And that has to do also with the pace of life, economy, capitalism for sure. People have no time to breathe, much less think about soul or human connection or what the hell are you talking about? We're surviving here. So there is no luxury. There is no luxury of soul. Almost like we have lost the meaning of soul, right? Mm-hmm. Amongst everything that you have done, there is the concept of sacred dance. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, permeating everything. The divine feminine and sacred dance. Could you tell our listeners, our audience, what is the divine feminine? And I know I'm throwing huge questions at you, and you always have to make an effort to synthesize. What is the divine feminine, and what is your concept of sacred dance? Because there are many concepts of sacred dance, and we may claim all dances are sacred and blah blah blah. We could go in so many directions, but what is your particular concept of the divine feminine and of sacred dance?
Well, to me, the divine, first of all, we live in a polar world, and we have, positive, and we have everything, molecules, everything are held together by this magnetic force, the positive and the negative, or the masculine, feminine, yin yang, whatever you want to call it. It's these opposing forces that are drawn to each other. And I think that's the important thing, is to remember that we need that. We don't want neutrality. We want integration, but we don't want neutrality. That's a very dangerous place to be. So we have the divine feminine, we have the divine masculine. Because I'm a woman, I work with the divine feminine. I don't feel that I have enough experience to work with the divine masculine. I'm happy to have a conversation, but I don't have any personal experience. So I work mainly with the divine feminine. And again, through these teachings of Hector, I came to realize that at the essence of everything is this serpent goddess. And the serpent goddess, there are two aspects of the serpent goddess. So if you look through mythology, every culture has this. And this is my current pursuit that I'm passionate about. So the divine feminine has these two aspects, the light and the dark, let's say. So in ancient Egypt, it was Hathor and Sekhmet. These are the two aspects of the serpent goddess. And if we look, we can explain it as many things. We can explain it as the Kundalini, which has the two serpents, as DNA, which has these two intertwining. And I think that they're all the same thing. And so when we are dancing, when we're engaging with the serpent goddess, we are changing our DNA, or we're activating our DNA. We're moving on that particular level. So the divine feminine, I think, is this empowered feminine because we are in contact with both of those aspects, those light and dark aspects, and they're equally as important. So I teach a course on the serpent goddess, the dual aspects of the divine feminine. We look at Hathor and who she was, and we look at Sekhmet, but these things need to come together. And I think as women, modern women, they've been separated. They were separated a long time ago, and it was the sacred and the profane. And we need to bring that together because we need those dark aspects, those Sekhmet aspects, as much as we need those Hathor aspects. So for me, the divine feminine is, as women, this is the energy that we want to aspire to. So I am not a goddess, but I can look at the attributes of a goddess, which wasn't a goddess. It was a netter. In ancient Egypt, a netter is an aspect of nature. And I can look at Hathor, and she is the goddess of vibration or of movement. I can aspire to embody those things. I can look at Sekhmet. I can see that she was the devouring one. She was the powerful one. And I can aspire to that, and I can integrate aspects of that. But we need to integrate both. And as women, we need to find that divine part of ourselves, which doesn't mean I'm going to be divine. To me, divine or sacred are interchangeable. They're like an essence of something. And I think that's why the ancient Egyptians had these netters. They were blueprints. They were something that we can integrate, that we can feel, we can vibrate, we can incorporate. So to me, I'm not sure if I've fully explained the divine feminine. If I've made that understandable, I am trying to condense this all into a very, but I think it's about finding our sacredness as women. So that is what I'm talking about when I talk about the divine feminine, that pure, sacred part of ourselves that we can embody, that we can bring to light, that we can live, that we can vibrate within ourselves. And there's many ways to do that. I think sacred dance, the second part of your question, is a very important way to do that. And when I say dance, dance can be movement. Dance can be putting on a piece of music and just rocking from side to side. That's how I start in my classes. We just shift our weight from one side to the other in alignment with the music, because the music becomes our guide. And to me, this is an analogy for life. We hear the call of the divine and we follow it. We follow it with movement. So sacred dance, I think, is really just taking your dance to a deeper level. As we were talking about soul, it's not about performance at all, in the sense of, I am not doing this for you to watch. I am doing this for myself to exude, it's a kind of poetry or something inner that is coming out of you. And to me, that's what sacred dance is the direction of movement. It's something that's very deep inside that I am bringing out to the universe, and I'm not doing it for somebody else. I'm doing it for the divine. I am dancing that dance of co-creation, and I'm doing it just for the pure joy of it, for the connection of it. And I think that's what makes it sacred. Joy, sacredness, the feeling, the intention. I think that is what makes something sacred.
And you know, something interesting, that even when a dancer is a performer, and this happens, you know, it happened in my trips and festivals, and now in my school, of course, because I've observed that most dancers that come to me and are in my school are intermediate level, advanced, and professional dancers. I did not create it intentionally like that, but it happens like that. for some reason. So a lot of performers, right? Dancers who are on stage. And one of the things that I always teach them, and it is hard for them to integrate, is that even when you're performing for an audience, you're dancing for yourself first of all and foremost. Because if you're not going through that powerful, soulful experience, your audience is not going to go through that experience either. They're going to feel whatever you are feeling. So when you put your focus on them, you're taking your focus off you, where the focus should be. And they should feel the emanation of that process of dancing for yourself from within. They should not be the target to please, the target to achieve. So it is very interesting, as I was listening to you and listening to the concept of sacred dance for you, as so many dancers, even professionals with experience, have a hard time dancing for themselves. They really do. Either because they feel the pressure of needing to impress, they feel the pressure of people's opinion, they feel perhaps that they have to move a certain way to fit a mold, to fit something that is expected. I'm not sure, because I've always been on the other side of the barricade. I've always danced for myself, even when I have a performance. It's always very clear that if I don't feel it, they don't feel it. So I never struggled with that. And I can handle not having praise and not having applause. I can handle it. I've had more than enough of both. And I'm not working for it. I'm working for other reasons. So it is hard for dancers to go into that inner space and inner worth, because you have to believe you're worthy of that joy. You have to believe you're worthy of that soulful experience. If you believe you're not worthy, you're not going to go there. You're going to dance to impress. You're going to dance to prove something. You're going to dance to attract attention, or to attract an applause, to attract a positive comment. So it's so important that women, especially women, I believe, understand that they are deserving of that experience. They are deserving of dancing for themselves, doing something for themselves, rescuing their soul and their pleasure, their sensuality, because we're also talking about sensuality. That joy that you were mentioning, that's sensuality. That's the true meaning of sensuality. That I'm enjoying myself so much. And I'm free from expectations. I'm just in it. I'm living it. And that emanates. That's very attractive, by the way, when you're not trying to be attractive. That is attractive. What emanates from you in that state of grace is very attractive. Now, I had another question. I was careful not to interrupt you because you were in such a beautiful flow.
I was in a flow.
Yeah. Yes. I did not want to interrupt you, but a very interesting thing that you said. When we think about the ancient Egypt goddesses, once again, what most of us think as, we think of those goddesses as, let me find the right word, symbols, distant references, mystical figures. We don't see them as invitations that are already within us. When you mention the goddess Hathor or the goddess Sekhmet, we don't understand those are aspects of nature, of human nature, that we can integrate, we can develop, or not. It really depends on which invitation do you want to take. Maybe I am more identified with Sekhmet, for instance. So for me, it's an easy invitation to say yes to. Other women will be the opposite. They will have a hard time with Sekhmet. They will go to Hathor, or they will go to other goddesses, which are symbols, which are invitations, and say, no, I prefer not to go there. I prefer not to bring, for instance, the power, the fierceness of Sekhmet into my reality. I prefer not to go there. It's scary. I am weak. I am fragile. I am whatever I feel I am, and I don't want to go there. Now, how do you, as a teacher, present those invitations to your students, to your groups, without invading their freedom, their free will of saying, I'm not ready to go there, or I don't want to go there? How do you navigate this space between teaching what you got to teach and telling them, these are the qualities that you could integrate, that you could embody not in order to be a different person, but to be more of yourself, to be a more evolved version of yourself, a more complete version of yourself. And how do you deal with the fact that not everybody's ready, not everybody's willing, and they have the right not to be willing? I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how do you deal with that as a teacher?
Well, first of all, I think the best word to use rather than God or goddess is archetype. And this is going back to Carl Jung's work. And if we think about the field, okay, the 0-point field, which again, I think is fairly common in people's understanding now, all of these archetypes reside in that 0-point field as a vibration. So whatever that, say it's the mother archetype, all of that resides in that field, and which means it resides within us. So I think that, so all of it is within us, and it's what we choose to activate. But at certain periods of time, you're going to be called to activate something. For example, let's just use Hector and Sekhmet because we've been talking about that. There's going to be a time that you need to invoke that energy of Hector. It's not because I want you to do that. It's because you need it. There, you need that Sekhmet piece there. I call it getting my Sekhmet on. If I have to like go out and do something where I need to be a little more assertive, it's like, okay, let me do this. And so I can invoke that. I think as women, I'm talking to women because I am one, we need to find both parts of those ourselves, both of those within ourselves in order to be whole. Doesn't mean we have to live life as Sekhmet. It means that I need to be able to find that piece of myself when I need that piece of myself. So I see it as a healing process that I need to find that piece of myself, and then I get to choose when I'm going to use it, or any of them. And I think that was the point. Maybe there's a time where I need to invoke Thoth, who's the god of wisdom. I want to research something, so I want to invoke those aspects, and I can do that. So I think that's the thing, is that it's not that you're going to just identify with one. You're going to identify with all of them at different points in your life. And if we look at astrology, the way I see astrology, or the way I do astrology, is that in your natal chart, you have different planets in different signs. And each one of those signs is an archetype, and so is the planet. So it's the way they interact with each other. So we can look at a natal chart. We can see what your gifts and challenges are as to what you were born with and where you need to have lessons to invoke those different archetypes. But it's all vibrating inside of you anyway. It's just about connecting to it and being able to use it and being able to understand it. Because the interesting piece about mythology is that it is written as a story, and we know how the story ends. So if you feel Sekhmet coming up, you know where that story is going. And that's a very interesting thing in your life. If you feel like you're living one of these archetypes, look at where the story goes and use that. It's not about changing it. It's about being empowered, because now I understand where this path takes me. So I think that it's about embracing all of it, but coming to balance within yourself. That again is something that we do not have in modern times. People are not balanced at all, and I think that we need to strive for that. So yes, certain things are going to be easier than others, but easy isn't, let's be challenged. Challenging,
yes.
That's how you grow.
Mm-hmm. Why are we so disconnected from our soul, especially in the Western world? What are the occurrences, the contexts, whatever, that have provoked this disconnection? What do you think, from an observer's point of view? Why have we lost connection to our soul?
because I think it makes us easier to program. I think there is an agenda in the sense that patriarchy is about power over. So if I want power over others, then I have to somehow find a way to make those people manageable. And school has to be the very first place that we all get broken, because we're all being programmed to learn in very specific ways, to not be creative. I mean, I don't know what school system you came up in, but I think most Western societies have a very similar school system where it's about breaking the child's will. And that, I was talking about children dancing. Well, stop doing that. Stop moving and sit still. Don't tell a child to sit still like that. Channel it into something. And we see that now with all of the information that's coming out, especially after the pandemic, about trauma. The pot was stirred and everybody's trauma came to the surface. And the first place it happens is when we're children, and then we spend the rest of our lives trying to straighten ourselves out. So I think that society is built in a very specific way to break your will and to make you more programmable. And people who are creative are not that easy to tame. I mean, during the revolution, all the people that were in Tahrir Square were artists, because artists are visionaries, and they're not the people that are willing to, live the status quo. So we break people's will in that way. Don't let them be creative. Tell them that there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. And so, yeah, it's just created a big mess. And that's the short answer to your question. But I think it starts at the very beginning.
And I think we need to bring it back so urgently. I mean, because that's also our humanity. When you lose contact with your soul, you lose your humanity, really.
Yes.
You lose every sense of what it means to be a human being. And we're more and more looking and acting like robots, looking and acting like machines. Technology has a lot of beautiful things. It allows us to be together, me and you right now. So it's amazing. And I love it as a tool. I think it can be used for amazing things, but it's also taking over in a way that is quite scary. I feel like the world is losing its humanity, what was left of it. And that is scary. So dance, and I am pretty sure you will agree with me on this, is a direct vehicle to the recovery of our human soul. It's something that you can do. It's very practical. It's very palpable that you can do to recover that connection with your soul, with your spirit, with your heart, with that makes you human. And when I say soul, I always think about the heart. That's also a very ancient Egyptian thing to say, because the heart was so important. The energy of the heart was so important. So when you connect to your heart, you connect to your soul. And when you connect to your soul, you recover the human that resides in you. You're not just another creature, another animal. Suddenly you are human. Now, there is one thing I forgot to ask you. We went into everything,
many things,
which was your first project in Egypt of working with breastfeeding mothers. I told you I would ask you again, and then we got focused on other issues. One single question about that. What have you learned about motherhood from that experience, from both Egyptian and foreign women that you were mentoring at the time in that breastfeeding group? Do you remember? I know it was a lot.
I remember very well, because it was very impacting for me. And I think I created that group again because I needed that group, or I would have needed that group. When after I did my training with La Leche League, I was at the end of my breastfeeding time with my children, but I can see how women, especially Western women, and you asked about Egyptians and, whether it was expats or Egyptians, there were Egyptians, but it was mainly expats. And the reason being that the Egyptian women were getting support at home. They were getting support from their mothers or other women, at least at that point in time. And I have to say, sadly, it's gone in a very Western direction of bottle feeding and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I think that that was my first expression. Again, it fit into my life at the time because I was a mother and I had been mothering and breastfeeding all that time. But I think it was really, again, about the divine feminine. And when I talk about the divine feminine, or why I think that that is so important, is because it's been lost from our memory. It's been erased, even in women. Sadly, the feminist movement seemed to be more about making us into men or doing masculine things or more patriarchal, meaning hierarchical things, rather than exalting the feminine principles, which are community. So you're talking about everybody losing their soul. I think it's because we lost the divine feminine. That's what brought us together. That mother archetype is so important. Why weren't the feminists supporting mothers in getting more time off or getting support or being paid even to stay home? Or, there are so many things that are important. And especially as the trauma comes up, we see this is traumatic to a child. They need this kind of support. So I think that's what I was tapping into when I did the La Leche League. I was aware how important that was. Having come from a Western society, I was so happy that I was here in Egypt when I raised my children and not in the West, because there would have been expectations about leaving my children and I didn't. I was hands-on. Nobody took care of my kids except, maybe my extended family. And although I think it was very unconscious at the time, I just could see that women needed support. I needed support that I got some of, but my mother-in-law is not my mother, and my mother was not here. So I was getting some support, and I could see how important that was. So I think that was my inspiration for creating that group, is that mothers need it's very isolating to be a mother, and we need support. So that's what I was going through. And as I said, then that kind of morphed into other things, but that was definitely the root, and I think a very important root.
It's beautiful. That's a subject for an entire episode, actually.
Yes, it is.
Motherhood and breastfeeding, and how isolated, especially Western women become when they become mothers. It's, and postpartum depression, I believe, also may come from that isolation, from that lack of support, that lack of community. I totally understand why you would fall in love with it and why you would need it. So much of what we do is because we need it, right?
Yes,
absolutely. I heard somewhere you teach what you need to learn, something like that. And it is true. You teach what you need to learn. And when you teach, you learn twice. Those are cliches that make perfect sense. Now, one last question, because Leslie, you do so many beautiful things. Where do I focus? It's difficult. About astrology. I did not know you did astrology, so pardon my ignorance, okay? When I revisited your website, I revisited your work, because then again, we spoke a few years ago, and I believe people are evolving. They're doing new things. I noticed astrology. Now, astrology is one of my biggest passions. I'm not an astrologer at all, okay? But I have my best friends. My two best friends are astrologers, go figure. And I read a lot about astrology. I study a lot by myself about astrology, and I'm always fascinated. Now, one very selfish personal question and one more wide question. Let's go to the wide first. How does astrology serve people? What is the biggest gift an astrologer, a professional astrologer, can give someone who comes for you to read their map, their natal chart? What is the most important thing you can deliver to that person?
The astrology that I do is very much archetypal astrology. So it's sort of what I explained before. I'm working with somebody's natal chart, I don't work with transits very much, except that in my groups, there are certain major transits like your Uranus opposition and your Chiron return. And these, I think, are so important. My whole, the unfolding of my work with Hector happened during my Uranus opposition. And that's a big subject, but it makes perfect sense. So mainly I'm looking at a natal chart, and I'm looking at those archetypes that are vibrating inside of you, which are your gifts and your challenges at the same time, because that's what the tools in our toolbox, that's what we have to work with. And so that's mainly what I'm looking at. So I'm usually working with women who are on a spiritual path and want to understand better how they can tune into very specific archetypes. So I think the kind of astrology I do is niche. Like I said, I'm not doing transits, but I'm doing it as a healing process, as an evolutionary process for you to better understand what that is that you have, what that is that's inside of you, and where you need to go, the things that you need to learn.
And would you agree that when you read a natal chart, and by the way, I'm going to post the links to your website or social media so that people can find you and book, a call with you, book a natal chart reading, or participate in one of your groups, in one of your courses. But when you are reading a chart, have you noticed, and feel welcome to disagree with me, but this is what I've observed, not as an astrologer, because I'm not an astrologer, but as a study person, as an interested person, that very often what is considered a negative aspect in your natal chart, an opposition, something that is a conflict, that causes friction, that is not fluid, is usually where your gift or your point of turning evolution resides. Yes. That there is this certain aspects in your natal chart have a bad reputation. People are afraid of them because, oh my God, I am doomed. But in reality, as I have observed, those conflictuous spots are usually where the light can come in.
Absolutely. And I think that people need to get over the idea that being challenged is a bad thing. I mean, think about a seed that's planted. Like, it has to push itself through the soil to break through. And so I think we should embrace challenge, and not as a bad thing. Why? I mean, life is dull if you're never challenged to do, if everything is just easy, why even be here? Like, what, you're just floating, down the river. What's the point of that? So, so yes, you have a challenge in your chart. The chart is about your soul's evolution. So if I'm going to evolve, I am going to be challenged, but I can look at my chart and I can know where the challenges are and I can prepare myself. And as I said, with the archetypes, you know how the story ends. So you know where you're going with this. So I think it's great information. And I think we can either do things easily or we can bang our head against the wall. And so embrace the challenges. I am being challenged at this moment, but I'm going to be creative and I'm going to find my way through. And through that, I'm going to learn whatever it is that I need to learn. And that's what I see about challenges in your chart, is that's your opportunity to learn. That's where, you're working out. That's where the gate is that I have to jump over. Well, I'm going to find a way to get over it, to get around it. Mm-hmm. And that's going to build my muscles, my soul muscles, is that, whatever.
Growth carries an element of pain and discomfort and frustration and a loss of your ego. And I think we live in a time when people are not very open to pain. They're not open to frustration. They're not open to disappointment. They're not open to failure. we are sold this idea that in order to be happy and successful, everything goes right and you are smiling all the time and you're happy and you nail it every time. And this is not true. It's true if you are in mediocrity, if you're not doing anything new, if you're not pushing yourself, if you're not tapping into your challenges, into the things that you need to develop, your blind areas, your blind zones, the things that you cannot see about yourself, your insecurities, your immaturities as a human being. If you're not growing, then maybe things are fine and smiley all the time. But the reality is growth carries pain. It can carry frustration. Every time you step up, every time you upgrade a part of your life, a part of your creative work, there is pain. There is a trial phase where you are not comfortable. You don't know if you're going to make it. You don't know whom am I going to become? What comes next? There is a discomfort in growth. As you were describing, when you plant a seed, in order for the seed to grow and pour out of the earth, there is effort, there is strain. In labor, in childbirth, there is pain. There is an element of friction, of pushing against something. And I feel we collectively are running away from pain, and we are running away from frustration, and we don't like to admit that we fail, that we are beginners at something, that we don't know something. We're too ego-oriented and too vain, and to be quite honest, pampered and spoiled. That's what I feel, you know.
Yes.
So one last question, and this is very private, and you are going to hate me for this, okay?
Uh-oh.
Because I am always curious. Of course, I'm an astrology junkie. So I know that astrologers don't like to be asked this because, again, I know a few really good astrologers and they always hate it. But what would you tell a person that has Sun in Gemini, Venus in Gemini, Moon in Aquarius, and Ascendant in Sagittarius? One thing at the top of your head, very superficial. And of course, we're not looking at the chart. We're not looking at aspects. We're not looking at anything. Just this Sun and Venus in Gemini, Moon in Aquarius, and Ascendant in Sagittarius. And that person is me. Of course, you already know I was making a gesture. What would you tell this freak?
I would say you're exactly where you should be because you're all about communication. Your Sagittarius ascendant, which is also my ascendant, is all about expansion. So yeah, traveling the world, connecting. It's also about higher learning. So that is the way that you are going to present in the world, is as that expansive energy. And because your sun and Venus, right, are in Gemini.
Yes. Yes.
You're going to be all about communication and showing the different sides of things. And your Aquarius moon allows you to have, first of all, to work with technology, but also to think about humanity and think about ways. Aquarius is all about that integration of opposites. Its symbol is the Kundalini, the Caduceus. So it's about bringing those things together. So I would say that your life has led you to this point of, and what you're doing, you're traveling, you're educating people, and you're showing them a different side of Oriental dance. And through this podcast, I think this is a beautiful way to take another step on that path.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Oh my God, we would be here forever. And by the way, again, I will make sure that I share the link of your website where people will be able to contact you either for astrology, for your courses, for your groups. Are you organizing trips in Egypt?
Not right now. I hope to next year. Everybody after the pandemic, I think Egypt was on everybody's bucket list. So tourism here just went through the roof and you couldn't go anywhere. So I think it's good to just take a beat and then do it.
Updates will be in your website. I presume there's also a newsletter, your newsletter.
Yes, I have a mailing list. Yes.
So we're going to share that in the notes to the show so that anyone who's interested knows exactly how to find you. And we're going to close. We went overboard, of course, with our time, as I presumed we would, with closing questions that I share with all my guests. Okay, so first we're going to do a ping pong, fast question and answer, and then I'm going to ask you for a couple of recommendations. Okay, so first ping pong question, and I'm going to read from my notes so that I don't forget, is favorite word.
Word? Sacred.
Favorite feeling.
Feeling? Well, bliss, oneness.
Favorite food.
Ooh, I don't know. Wow. That really shouldn't be that difficult, should it? Can I just say fruits, like fruits in general?
Yeah, whatever makes sense to you. Fruits. Okay. Yeah. Favorite place.
Ooh. Dendara Temple. Yeah, absolutely.
Dendara Temple in Egypt, guys.
Yeah.
One wish for yourself?
Oh, to connect with other people, to meet and connect with other people on their journey. I really enjoy expanding that, my Sagittarius ascendant. Yeah. And just really connecting with people who are on a path, like-minded. Yeah.
One wish for the world?
Enlightenment and depth of experience, maybe.
Depth of
maybe
experience,
that's the same
that's
thing.
Good. Depth of experience is a good one.
Yeah.
It's a good one. Recommendations. One book everyone should read.
Well, Dance of the Moon by Dan Furst.
Dance of the Moon by Dan Furst. Okay.
Yes. He was a dear friend, and it's a beautiful book. Yeah.
Okay, Dance of the
You'll
Moon.
like it. He was an astrologer, so it's up your alley.
Okay. I am also going to ask you for those references so that we can post them in the comments to the show and people can find that book. One movie everyone should watch.
Ooh. The only one that's coming to mind is Kiss of the Spider Woman. And so since that came to my mind, there must be a reason.
Why not? Why not? Okay. One word that uplifts your soul.
Ooh. Hector.
How beautiful. Thank you so much, Leslie. We are going to close this episode of the Oriental Café. I am going to wish you all the light, all the inspiration on your path. I know you don't need it. You have your own, but it's always good to receive some from the outside. It's never too much. And thank you for, as usual, giving it your best. You always bring so much juice to the table. You're never shallow. You're never taking back or keeping back information. You are very generous and very inspiring. And it's been a pleasure having you in this episode. Not surprisingly, I was expecting it.
Well, thank you.
It was not a surprise. Okay.
No, thank you. And best of luck with this podcast. I think it's the right next step. Yes.
Yes, thank you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite everyone to check the links related to your job, your jobs, not job, it's your missions, plural. And I'm also going to invite everyone to follow the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the newsletter of the podcast. We're offering some special features to our podcast list. And I will invite you to join me in my upcoming episode, and I hope to see you and speak with you soon, Leslie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good time, everyone. See you and speak with you soon.